I still vividly recall the stifling heat of Hawaii in 1943, the smell of red earth clinging to my army boots, and the gentle yet artificial sound of waves lapping against the white sand. People often thought of Hawaii as paradise. For tourists, that might have been true. But for an American soldier like me, stationed on Oahu after the Pearl Harbor disaster, it was an island that never slept. Not just because of the constant hum of training planes, but also because of the unspeakable things that lurked in the dark. I belonged to the 35th Infantry Regiment, stationed at a training camp near the western forests of Oahu. From the very first days, we received unofficial warnings from the seasoned soldiers. If you're on night patrol, don't turn left at the Koa Forest crossroads. And if you hear drums, don't react. They weren't smiling when they said it. I thought it was just a way to scare the new recruits. Then, one night in early June 1943, I began to understand that in Hawaii, some things couldn't be explained by military logic. Night duty was something no one wanted, but everyone had to do. I was assigned to patrol the old air defense barracks, a row of derelict corrugated iron buildings left in ruins after the December 7, 1941 attack. Burn marks were everywhere, and the old smell of gunpowder seemed to still linger in the air. The moon that night was bright enough for me to see my long shadow stretched across the concrete floor. I had just reached the front of building number 7 when my flashlight flickered and died. No surprise there. Army flashlights back then always found a way to fail at the worst possible moment. But when I turned it back on, I saw a strange wet streak on the concrete, as if someone had just walked by. Military boot prints. But there was no one there. The wind whistled through a broken window, making the door creak, and I heard something echoing from inside. Not a rat, not the wind either. It was footsteps. I stepped back, pointing my rifle into the darkness, and that's when I saw him. A soldier wearing an outdated uniform from the 1910s, as if from World War I. He walked past the window, didn't look at me, didn't stop, just walked straight through the wall behind him and vanished. I swear to God, after that night I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was afraid of being laughed at, but because I didn't want to recount it. But I started noticing others had the same look in their eyes after their shifts. Dull, cold, and often staring towards the USS Arizona wreckage in the easy distance at the harbor. I had a close friend, Corporal Jim Reyes, of Puerto Rican descent. He used to be an electrical technician at the 12th Air Force headquarters. One night he told me, "Wilkins, I've requested to be taken off duty at the headquarters. I haven't been able to sleep since that time." "Saw a ghost again?" I joked. He didn't laugh. "I saw the automatic alarm lights come on the 3rd floor, where no one was supposed to be. When I went to check, the smell of sulfur hit me, and I heard metal clanking on the floor, like someone dragging a rifle. But that floor has been locked since 1941. The 12th Air Force headquarters, I heard, had been the command center for the Hawaii response after the Pearl Harbor bombing. Many people died there, their bodies not recovered in time. Rumor had it that because of too many strange occurrences, the military eventually had to move the guard post outside, having soldiers stand watch in a small hut instead of inside. This was unheard of for such a vital facility. I started writing down the strange stories I heard, like a habit. Later, when I returned to civilian life, I realized that if I hadn't recorded them, I might have thought I imagined it all. I visited the USS Arizona Memorial in 1944 during a short leave, standing on the memorial bridge, looking down at the ship's wreckage in the clear water. I felt a chilling sensation. A soldier standing next to me quietly said, "More than 1,000 men are still down there, and there are some who don't want to be forgotten." A famous photograph taken in 2011. I had never seen it, but I heard it showed a faint face on the water right where I was standing. It sent shivers down my spine. One of the stories that stuck with me the most happened at Hickam Field, where there was a diner for resting soldiers. That building had been bombed during the 1941 attack. In 1945, Jim and I went there to eat near midnight after our shift. As soon as we stepped in, the lights in the diner flickered like a horror movie, then went out completely for a few seconds. When they came back on, Jim stood motionless. "Did you see that?" he whispered. I turned my head. At the table in the corner of the room, where no one had been sitting since we walked in, there was a fresh, wet mark, as if someone had just placed a cold glass. But there was no one. That night, we left without eating anything. Even though soldiers are disciplined, no one could deny it. In Hawaii, there was something beyond control. Some blamed the night marchers, a legend about the spirits of ancient Hawaiian warriors. They said that on some moonlit nights, people could hear distant drums, the steady sound of marching feet, and they shouldn't stand in their way, unless they wanted to be dragged into the other world. Once, while patrolling the forest near Pali Summit, Sergeant Jackson and I heard those drums. We stopped, motionless, our hearts pounding. Neither of us said a word. After about 5 minutes, the sound vanished. Jackson never mentioned it again, and he transferred units back to the mainland just a month later. July 1944. The air on Oahu was unusually hot. News from Europe and the Pacific Front poured in daily. The Allies were pushing back the Japanese, but the casualties were significant. Meanwhile, in our rear echelon, the invisible fear crept in, not from bullets, but from nameless, faceless things. After that ghostly night shift at Hickam Field, I was more convinced than ever that something had taken root deep in the island's soil and soul. It wasn't manifest like an enemy, but it was persistent, lurking, and left its mark on the mind. Stories about the night marchers, ancient warrior spirits, became more prevalent. Despite being a soldier with firm belief in weapons and training, I couldn't deny the presence of strange coincidences. That August, a 4-man patrol never returned after entering the Ko'olau forest at midnight. They were found 3 days later, unharmed, not insane, but completely silent. They didn't speak anymore, didn't communicate, didn't respond. All 4 were subsequently sent back to the mainland for psychiatric treatment. I knew one of them, Private Harlan, who had been the most talkative man in the unit. But when I saw him again in the hospital, his eyes were blank, his lips tightly pressed. The nurse said that night, he mumbled only one sentence. They walked through me. They didn't see me, but I felt every step. I was assigned to assist with The USS Arizona Memorial Ceremony on December 7th, 1944, exactly 3 years after the tragedy. We stood solemnly on the floating bridge over the water in a light rain. As the ceremony was about to end, a young soldier taking photos suddenly collapsed. When he was brought to the aid station, he repeatedly said, "I saw them looking up from down there. They don't know they're dead." I stepped out onto the bridge railing, looking down at the calm water. It was the first time I'd seen it so clearly. Not just the wreckage, but also movement. Something like dark shadows swimming against the light beneath the oil slick. Not fish, not floating debris. Human-shaped shadows. Later, that soldier retired early. I also gave up my habit of looking down at the water. Late 1944, I was temporarily reassigned to a new guard post near Wahiawa Mountain, an old Royal Hawaiian Navy garrison before colonial times. The small house, built of redwood, sat on the edge of the forest, unoccupied for years because it was too cold and damp. But I didn't feel cold. I felt watched. On the very first night, I heard whispers, like human voices, but in no language I knew. I turned on my flashlight, checked the entire house. No one, no rats, no wind. But when I returned to my bed, I saw my military jacket neatly folded, placed on the table, even though I had hung it on the wall hook before. I went outside to breathe. The air felt frozen, the moon obscured by clouds. In the distant darkness, I saw a line of people, blurry like mist, moving along the hillside. Each one wore a war helmet, carried a spear, and walked barefoot. No sound. They didn't look at me. When I blinked, they vanished. I didn't sleep in that house another night. Back at the main barracks, I realized many guards shared the same obsession. 3:17 a.m. Almost once a week, motion sensors would trigger alarms in the abandoned buildings, even though the security system had been turned off. Each time we checked, there was nothing. But the newly installed surveillance cameras, technology was still rudimentary back then, showed blurry figures gliding past the lens. No one could clearly distinguish what they were. But the commanders couldn't ignore it forever. Finally, a special research team from Washington was dispatched. They checked signals, air samples, and recorded sounds for several nights. The official conclusion: no identifiable threats. But the very next day, they left without further explanation. One of them left behind a recording, which Jim accidentally got his hands on. I listened to it that night. After about 12 minutes of silence, a short segment played. The sound of drums, slow, and heavy breathing close to the microphone, as if something knew it was being recorded. January 1945. As fierce battles raged in Iwo Jima and the Philippines, our base on Oahu fell into an unusually profound stillness. It wasn't the quiet before a storm, but a silence shrouded by something ominous, as if the entire island was holding its breath, afraid of something from within. By this time, the 3:17 a.m. alarms became as regular as clockwork, and the soldiers started calling it Ghost Hour. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew that whenever the alarm sounded at 3:17, no one would be sent to check. Simply put, they were scared. One rainy night in early February, I received an urgent call to Barracks E, where Lieutenant Harold Menzies had suddenly gone missing. He was a level-headed man, a veteran commander from Guadalcanal, with no history of psychological issues. His room showed no signs of a struggle, no missing belongings. The door was unlocked, and his bed was neatly made. But on his desk, he'd left a small, unsigned note. "If I don't return before dawn, please lock this room forever. Something is calling me." The search lasted 3 days. We scoured areas around Pearl Harbor, the forests near Hickam, and even the abandoned buildings. No trace. But on the third night at precisely 3:17 a.m., the alarm rang again at Old Building 12, the former command headquarters that had been abandoned due to paranormal incidents. When we arrived, only a single light bulb was flickering in the dark corridor, and the smell of gunpowder mixed with the scent of damp, rotting seaweed. No one in the team talked much after that incident. A week later, Lieutenant Menzies' room was sealed. No one cleaned it. No one was allowed in. I started to dig deeper. A local electrician named Kimo, who worked on the base, told me an ancient legend. The rock layer beneath Oahu is where noble warriors were ceremonially buried in ancient times. When foreigners came and dug, building barracks, they severed the connection between the land and the spirits of the ancestors. Those footsteps at night, they aren't meant to scare you. They are a reminder. You do not belong here. Kimo pointed me to a small cave in the northern mountains, where he said the ancients used to transition souls to the ocean. I went there on my last afternoon before my night guard duty ended. The cave was deep, the air damp and cold. On the stone walls were faint drawings, faceless figures, spirals leading into the darkness. I stood still for almost 10 minutes, and when I stepped outside, I swear I heard drums, distant but clear, echoing from within the mountain. A final strange event occurred on the very night the Japanese lost control of Okinawa. Rain poured down on the base, and the entire barracks lost power for 2 hours. I was on watch in the guard tower when I saw a procession of people in the rain. They wore black cloaks, moving from the military cemetery towards Pearl Harbor. No one carried an umbrella. No one spoke. I called my commander. The line was static. I shone my spotlight on them, no reflection, just shadows. Then they vanished into thin air, as if they had never existed. The next morning, at the spot where I saw them standing, there were footprints, but not of American military boots. They were bare footprints, drenched, leaving silent, muddy impressions. May 1945, I was transferred to Guam. As I left, I looked back at Oahu from the ship. The sea was calm, the sky bright. But I knew that behind that peaceful facade lay layers of memory, war, death, and something that never wanted to be awakened. Hawaii is paradise, yes, but not for all souls. Some remain, walking in the darkness, guarding something that humans have forgotten. I returned to my hometown in Ohio in the spring of 1946, after Japan surrendered and the war ended. We were called survivors, those who had returned from hell with glory and duties fulfilled. But no one spoke of the other hells, the kind not found on maps, not written in history books. What we saw on Oahu, Hawaii, no one asked about and no one wanted to know. I never married. Not because I didn't have the chance, but because every night I still dreamed of 3:17 a.m. The alarm still rang in my head, even though my current room didn't have a single alarm clock. In September 1947, I wrote a letter to the Army Veterans Command in Honolulu. I intended to ask if anyone had ever investigated the strange incidents at Hickam Barracks and Pearl Harbor. But then I tore up the letter before I could send it. I knew they wouldn't answer, or they would reply with meaningless platitudes. No. Unusual incidents were recorded. They always did that, because some truths are too difficult to officially acknowledge. 8 years after the war, a local newspaper published a sensational story. A tourist had captured an image of a face underwater at the USS Arizona Memorial. I froze when I saw the photo. The face, blurry yet distinct, appeared as if rising from the depths, eyes staring intently at the world that had forgotten it. Some said it was just a trick of the light, but I knew. I recognized those eyes. They belonged to Lieutenant Menzies. Returned to Hawaii, 1961. Came to Oahu as a tourist, this time without a uniform, without a gun, only with memories. Everything had changed. Hotels sprang up, tourists laughed, beaches were crowded. But when I reached the old site of the 12th Air Force headquarters, I saw it was still fenced off. No guard post, no soldiers, but the fence was still new. Someone was still keeping it locked. I met an elderly native man about 80 years old named Mano. When I asked him about the night marchers, he was silent for a long time before pointing to the Ko'olau mountain range. They never left. They are the guardians of Hawaii's spirit. Only outsiders think they are ghosts. I bowed my head, feeling for the first time in my life a sense of remorse towards an island. Many years later, as people rushed to make films and write books about the battles, about the victories, I never wrote a single line. I didn't want to recount how many Japanese soldiers I had shot, but only wanted people to know that not every wound of war bleeds. Some just bleed into the earth and stay there. Oahu, to me, was not just a military base. It was a tomb without markers for countless unquiet souls. From American soldiers killed at Pearl Harbor, to native warriors, and even those who were simply victims of forgetting. When I was 84, I dreamt I was standing on the deck of the USS Arizona, the ship intact, bathed in golden sunlight. Someone stood beside me, their face unclear, but I knew it was Menzies. He said nothing, just placed a hand on my shoulder. I asked, "Are all at peace now?" He smiled, then pointed to the water. I looked and saw a silent procession at the bottom of the ocean, each person marching in unison without a sound, black cloaks fluttering. They weren't angry, no resentment, just walking forever to a place we can't follow. I write these lines not to be believed, but not to forget. That island, in its splendid beauty and today's tourist smiles, is still a gateway. Not hell, not heaven, but a place where unfinished things find a way to exist. If one day you visit Oahu, stand at the Arizona Memorial, or walk through the old barracks at dawn, pause for a moment. If you hear drums, don't be afraid. Stand still, close your eyes and say, "I remember you, I haven't forgotten." Perhaps that is enough.